Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 effectively prevents local governments from denying cell tower permits on health or environmental grounds, as long as the proposed installation meets the Federal Communications Commission's (FCC) 1996-era guidelines, which consider only heat-based or thermal effects. However, a 2021 court ruling in Environmental Health Trust et al. v. FCC challenged the FCC's rationale for ignoring modern research on non-thermal biological effects of RF radiation. This court decision, plus newer studies like the National Toxicology Program (NTP) findings, lays bare the reality that thermal-only standards are outdated and fail to account for the nonlinear ways RF can harm organisms, even at levels below what causes measurable heating. The FCC court loss, an overview. In August 2021, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit vacated or invalidated part of the FCC's earlier decision not to update its 1996 exposure guidelines. The court stated that the FCC failed to address evidence of non-thermal biological effects and offered no reasoned explanation as to why more than 25 years of research was excluded from their safety assessments. Key takeaways from the ruling: the thermal-only model is inadequate. The court signaled that ignoring non-thermal effects such as oxidative stress, DNA breaks, and neurological disruption is not scientifically justified. Public health concern studies compiled by organizations like Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense show potential links between chronic low-level RF exposure and cancer, fertility issues, behavioral changes in children, and more. The FCC disregarded these findings without adequate rationale. Legal consequences. When the court vacated the FCC's inaction, it effectively undercut the premise that compliance with FCC guidelines alone is a conclusive statement of safety. The NTP study, Nonlinear Cancer Risks at Lower Power Levels. The NTP, or National Toxicology Program, conducted a $30 million multi-year study exposing rodents to cell phone-like RF radiation. Remarkably, the study found clear evidence of tumors, specifically schwannomas of the heart and gliomas in the brain, in male rats. More unexpected. Some malignant effects appeared more pronounced at lower exposure levels than at higher ones, indicating a nonlinear or inverted U dose-response curve. This contradicts the simplistic notion that lower power always equals lower risk. Instead, it suggests that how cells respond to certain frequencies and modulations can be more complex than pure heat-based thresholds. Why this matters. Thermal models fall short. A model predicated solely on preventing excessive heat or SAR limits ignores the possibility that subthermal intensities might trigger different biological pathways, like altered ion channel function, oxidative stress, or hormone disruptions. Dose-response complexity. The NTP's finding of increased tumor incidence at lower radiation levels implies that typical safe assumptions like linear extrapolation from high-power to low-power exposures do not capture real-world biological risk. Implications for Section 704. Section 704 forces states and municipalities to rubber-stamp cell towers if they meet FCC guidelines that were deemed outdated by the 2021 court ruling. They ignore over 25 years of peer-reviewed science on non-thermal effects. These guidelines don't address the nonlinear nature of RF exposures, which the NTP study highlighted. In practical terms, even if a local council wanted to regulate a tower's placement due to concerns about children or residential safety, based on current research, it can't. The telecom company merely has to show compliance with the FCC's old thermal-based standard to override local objections. The constitutional angle. 10th Amendment concerns. By blocking local health-based decisions, Section 704 undermines the rights of municipalities to protect public welfare, a core function of local governance. First Amendment concerns. The inability to raise health arguments in official hearings effectively silences citizen petitions or lawsuits. Nonlinear, non-thermal effects. Why it all matters. Oxidative stress and free radical production. Studies show RF fields can increase reactive oxygen species, ROS, in cells, stress that can damage DNA and proteins without raising temperature. Calcium channel activation. RF exposure may activate voltage-gated calcium channels, altering intracellular signaling. Even small changes in channel activity can have big downstream impacts, from neurotransmission to gene expression. DNA and gene expression. Lab studies observed DNA strand breaks and epigenetic changes at power levels considered safe by FCC guidelines, further proof that heating is not the only mechanism of harm. Child vulnerability. Children's thinner skulls and developing nervous systems may make them especially susceptible. The NTP study's lower-level tumor induction resonates with the concern that even minimal exposures during childhood could yield long-term effects. The path forward. Given the court ruling and the NTP's revelations, revise the FCC guidelines, incorporate current science on non-thermal, non-linear dose responses, conduct transparent, ongoing reviews rather than clinging to 2 decades-old data. Repeal or reform Section 704. Restore localities' right to consider all health evidence, thermal or non-thermal, when deciding on tower placement. Uphold constitutional principles by allowing states and cities to protect their communities. Research and public awareness. Expand independent studies on low-level RF exposures, various frequencies and modulation patterns. Educate the public, health professionals, and policymakers on why thermal only is scientifically incomplete. Industry accountability. Telecom companies should adopt the precautionary principle, place towers at safer distances from schools and dense neighborhoods until thorough, modern, non-thermal safety protocols are established. Conclusion. Section 704's requirement that local governments accept FCC standards without question was already controversial. It becomes even more indefensible after the FCC lost in court for failing to address non-thermal effects, and after the NTP uncovered more cancer at lower power levels, a finding that underscores the non-linear reality of RF risks. The bottom line is that thermal-only guidelines are no longer credible. Forcing communities to ignore modern science under Section 704 is not just unconstitutional, it's a direct threat to public health. Only by repealing or drastically revising Section 704 and updating the FCC framework to include non-thermal evidence can we ensure our children and communities receive genuine protection in the wireless age. Visit RF Safe to learn more.